before speaking about the role and place of creativity in the context of what we've been addressing so far, it would be good to orient ourselves in terms of the role and place of emotions and feelings, and how this in turn viewed in Kashmir Shaivism, how this understood in the Tantra of Kashmir Shaivism. Again, we can see here the differences in approaches. The Advaitic approach is to see all emotions just as all thoughts in as transparent manner as possible, obviously so as to disidentify, or so as not to allow that process of identification, the process of reinforcement, because emotions here, together with mental construct, is what crystallizes the notion of whom we consider ourselves to be, simply because we cannot, if we do not have enough experience in this realm, experience emotions for what they are. These are immediately associated with a certain narrative. This is a very important topic. This is where we could even loosely title it the Tantric psychology. So in Vedanta, the prevalent attitude and the method is obviously recognizing all this as illusory, not just transitory. Transitory, it's obvious, but illusory. The unwavering allegiance to Brahman here is in that the identity is only with the highest, Aham Brahmasmi. So any transitory phenomena experienced here is seen from that light. So therefore, the working here, one could say, is in simply putting it a blind eye, is simply to not give a hoot about how one feels, because all this has no value because of the aforementioned reasons in our previous discourses of what forms the very premises of behind the Advaita Vedanta and that final of the Vedas, like culmination of all the Vedas. This is also how Advaita Vedanta can be spoken of, as a culmination of the Vedas. It's the culmination of all the wisdom, also known as the end of the Vedas. That's the term Vedanta. The end, Vedanta. End of the Vedas. Is where the knower and known are consciously brought to the state of reconciliation. So that's the meaning. In Tantra, the approach is different for the very aforementioned reasons that Tantra understands this relationship between the absolute and activity in a different light. And you know why already? So therefore, immediate questions will rise. So what about all this gamut? What about all this gamut? What about mental, emotional, psychological activity? So instead, Tantra advocates minute, intimate knowledge of the emotional states, which otherwise can lead to bypassing, and furthermore, or even more importantly, because here Tantra will work with dissociating emotions from the narrative that they are accompanied by due to the mental tendencies to link emotional states with how that is associated already in that synaptic connection in the cortexes. Do you understand it? Do you understand the connection? Every emotional state no longer experienced for what it is. It is experienced in conjunction with what impression was left when these emotions perhaps were learned for the first time. Therefore, Tantric psychology speaks of the attachment to certain emotions, because these emotions become prevalent modes of expression. So when we are triggered, someone's response may be a withdrawal, because that's how they learn to deal with being triggered. Someone's response may be to simply run away, which is another form of withdrawal. Someone's would be to pick up a fight, where dominating emotion will be that of anger. Someone might just, less usual and less common, have a laugh, because that was a dominating response at the time when these emotions and certain situations were experienced. But there's always a connection. And this connection is what reinforces constantly these notions that needs to be loosened. So therefore Tantra works with, not just works with, gave tremendous importance to emotions and feelings from the point of view of what we now dubbed as Tantric psychology. But even more so in terms of what emotions and feelings play in the full scope of a given culture. Because as we will see that later, there is an intimate connection between the ability to express oneself in any way, and also in the ability to be a fulfilled spectator of any of the life dramas that we may be placed in to experience. And the spectator will be spoken of from the aesthetic point of view, as the spectator of a work of art, which immediately utilized in its full spectrum of understanding in how that can be utilized by tantrika in daily life for the purpose of attaining freedom. So therefore emotions and feelings play a tremendous role in this particular spiritual tradition. In Tantra in general, but in Trika Shaivism, Kashmir Shaivism in particular. We have noticed I trust you have noticed when I've asked you to turn your attention to what is your current emotion now, what is the prevalent state, what is the prevalent emotion. Is that, and this is very interesting, at any given moment there can only be one prevalent emotion. So this is a number one revelation and a very important one. And of course, the kids being with small children is unmistakably so. You know that they cannot, no matter how much we will try, they have to experience a full state in whatever, that doesn't matter what we try to do, to change their mood, right? To like, no, I want you to be this, darling. But I want to be on the floor and I want to feel this, darling mama and papa. This is because, but as we grow up, we get, forgive me, more confused and more perplexed. And also what enters in is the ability to control the way we are being perceived. Not that we control an emotion. None of us control an emotion. We control the outcome of that emotion. Let us not be mistaken here. If someone says that, oh, I found a way when I control my emotions, one can control responses, but not the emotion itself. One can control anger, but not the anger itself. One can only control the way one expresses oneself in that state. No more, no less. So when that possibility is given to turn the attention to the prevalent or currently being experienced emotion, which dominates right now your emotional body, you might have noticed also a location where that is experienced. And in most cases, I believe it was experienced somewhere in the heart area, in the heart region. Maybe not all of you paid attention to that, because maybe that was simply taken for granted, because it is so evident, so self-evident, so obvious. But when the emotion is experienced, and if you observe it, the feeling is experienced in the heart. And the reason for that is because there is an intimate connection between the movement of pranic currents and emotions. All prana gathers in the heart. All prana rests in the heart. Prana comes out and in into the heart, like this. Like this. There is this pulsation. And each emotive state has an allocated place right behind the heart. In that symbolically depicted and spoken of lotus of the heart, behind the back, where each emotion has a digit upon which the hands fall. And this is what predetermines how we feel at a given moment. Furthermore, when you have observed your feelings, I don't know how many of you, emotions, will later speak with greater degree of distinction, what do we mean by emotions and what feelings, because this will be relevant when we'll introduce the concept of rasas and bhavas, which gives rise to rag, the musical form in India, in Indian classical music. I wonder how many of you have noticed, because some of you maybe were at the cup where emotion is about to give way to another emotion. So turning the attention into that emotive state when it is not denied. What was happening? Therefore, when I ask you to do that, and I'd like us to return to that, and I would welcome all of you to experiment and try it on your own. What is happening when we turn attention to that so-called emotional introspection, which forms part of this work? Do you remember, some of you? Maybe it was too subtle, but do you remember what the feeling, an accompanying feeling? Please share, it will be interesting.
Some kind of peace comes in.
Mm-hmm. From that sheer fact of acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It already dissolved. That emotion, wherever it is, it dissolved.
Mm-hmm.
From a distance between me and the emotion at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Anyone else? Feel free to share. It all adds to the richness of our time here. Anyone else? Other? Yeah, as if the acuity of the emotion, which like it being held and it feels as if appeased, right? As if something was asking for an attention, was not giving it. But when the attention is given, has that. There's also an interesting thing, and we're not going to turn it into a rule of a thumb either, because it could actually be that when turning attention to a particular emotion, if that an emotion which happens to be repeatedly suppressed, or, please be attentive here, folks, I know you will tire it, I know. It's the end of the immersion. We're done with week-long immersion. We're now having fun 3 days now. Can we see it that way? Lay back, think of it as a spillover days, Teach can talk something, whatever, just chill out. But please, whenever, whatever emotion is being suppressed or indulged in will be brought more to fore. There will be this, as if the flame into which you threw some flaming substances, as if you inflamed it. There will be that feeling when you turn your attention to that. If you sit with that, if you introduce this into the emotional introspection, you will truly touch the area where the greatest healing can be done at the level of emotional healing than any psychological work can ever do for you in terms of the just talking about experiences. I'm terribly excited to tell you this. Why that is? Some psychologists already implement that because they're revolutionary and they're awakened beings. So they go outside the books of the psychology. Psychology believes, the premises of the modern psychology believes that it is the experience that lays sediment in the psyche. The experience, the trauma. Something happened, so it needs to be re-experienced, remembered. Grosso modo, no? More or less, that is the very, very... usually we have someone, at least one professional psychology in the group, right? But I spoke to the guys, and I was blessed to meet many psychologists. I gotten to know some legendary ones, like Stuart Savatsky from California, who legend because he has inherited the Institute for Kundalini Research from Lisa Nella, the founder. Unfortunately, the subsidiary all died out and that institute ended its existence. But Stuart Savatsky is still active. He's a really fun man, in his senior age, and he is a brilliant mind, one of the most brilliant, wild mavericks out there. You check his Facebook page, you'll be like, wow, worth going back to Facebook for, just to read Savatsky's post. He wrote that book, his latest book, a few years ago, 5, is a spiritual intimacy. Revolutionary, highly recommend. So I spoke and sat, Stuart and I have known each other since the actual, funny enough now, birth of Facebook. We were friends on Facebook since 2006. Probably very, very early days of Facebook. And then met physically in California. And then some other peers in the field who are also that mutual circle in California, in the Bay Area. They have their own organization, the board of trustees. They're all accountable to each other. It's a very professional organization. Many of these people, the two at least that I am speaking of, have gone through full Kundalini process. And they are transpersonal psychologists working in the area of marital relationships and all forms of relationships, counseling. So, in the classical, clinical perspective, it is the experience that need to be brought back forth. And that would amount for relieving the system from a deep-seated stress or trauma. But from Tantric point of view, it has nothing to do with experience. It's to do with the pact created between emotional response and mental interpretation. That's why I said, please, just sharpen up for a minute, then you can lag back into it. This is very, very important. So it's not an experience. You may think you've been abused, traumatized because of the act. But Tantra says no act is, everything is neutral, godly, and everything is Bhairava. Everything is Shiva. Who determines? So, what is important here, if you want to have true breakthrough, is that understanding. So therefore Tantra here separates emotional state for what they are. You need to kind of purify them. You need to take them out of the context of mental narrative, mental construct. And the mature psychological state, according to Tantra, is to experience emotions for what they are, totally independent of any context. Context is severed. You simply experience every emotion for what it is. This is, forgive me, the goal of Tantra at that level. The bridge and arch will be made into the area of the spectator and the connoisseur of art, because this is interconnected. What happens when we experience, when we undergo certain aesthetic experiences, when we are in direct contact, let alone communion with the work of art. But just going back to the emotions themselves. So remember that feeling, the feeling at the heart level, because all emotions are circled around that cavern, around that void of the heart, and they move as if hands around a magnificent dial. So, in addition to that softening, right, the sense of peace, that Mohammed was speaking about detachment, right? It's sort of like you. If we sit with emotion long enough, we can also sense palpably the change into another emotive state, which very often can have nothing to do with what was just experienced. Literally start crying a moment ago and laughing now. Or laughing a moment ago and suddenly all the tears are pouring out. See? Emotional changes, yes, changes to emotional state have that quality to them. Unpredictable and often contradictory. Now, I don't want to say in a healthy, because it's not, I don't like that word, healthy, because I don't know what the heck does it really mean. Let's say in a balanced, in a harmoniously developed individual, emotional states are in flux. It's a natural state. There's no being stuck on a particular emotion. So there is this a smoothly oiled mechanism behind. It's a sweeping movement of a spring drive that only finest timepiece can afford. Sweeping movement of a spring drive, of a Grand Seiko. Rolex tried to imitate that. It was only some in-houses built watches can boast that quality. It's the smoothness of the movement of the hands of the second hands. Do you understand that? What it means? For those of you who are not watch enthusiasts, that's what spring drive means in watch industry. So that smoothness here we're talking about in someone who is emotionally connected to a variety of states. Nothing is indulged in, nor there is a propensity to sweep anything under the carpet or deny the experience of emotions, that some of which are deemed to be negative. So there is a natural change. So therefore, knowing that, one never, for a moment, loses any peace and quietude if one is in a state of certain melancholy. One actually take advantage to fully enjoy it. But there are, of course, exceptions out of this, and there are clinical even conditions which become chronic, which spoken from clinical point of view, when this smoothness is lost. So instead the movement is jittering, jumping, and perhaps at the expense of being subjected repeatedly to certain states for way too prolonged a time. And we know that depression, onset of depression, is one of such undesirable conditions. So therefore, emotional introspection is very important to see where we are, so that we don't get stuck, nor do we deny experience of certain emotive states. And this experience in the heart, and that's why breathing through the heart is such a profound meditation, is precisely because it puts us in touch with a very subtle current, pranic current, that as if has the capacity to clear the area, to vent it, to create the movement and bring that movement to a conscious level of our awareness, where that possibility of living from the heart, as we speak of it in a variety of ways, becomes a reality, not just a wishful thinking. That's the power of the meditation of breathing through the heart. And also, paradoxically enough, is what makes our heart truly opened and also truly, truly self-sufficient and with a very strong sense of boundaries, which is required, because the opening of the heart is proverbially accompanied by a variety of undesirable phenomena when we inadvertently get subjected to various forms of emotional, can we use the word dump? Like where we become that reservoir where particularly in close connections, we can be subjected to having certain emotional stuff dumped at us, and inevitably it can only be taken at the heart level because nowhere else. So the strength of the heart here is that kind of a strength of the heart, you know, I don't know, line of the heart, this traditional kind of references, right? Given line of the heart is that there is this magnanimous generosity, but also don't mess around with me kind of thing. So it's like nobody dares to dump any stuff because this territory is like, this is a just situation. Always ready for reaching out. Compassion is one's second nature. Empathy is one's second name. But there is no possibility for anyone to come and begin to mess around with your emotional state because you already dissociate consciously, disconnected. This how emotions are played here and impact the peace of mind, so to speak. So in other words, we can only be offended, truly, we can only be offended or insulted when there is a strong connection between any emotion and the narrative that immediately being picked up by mental construct. Then there is always a possibility, always a possibility for, you know, that's why that's in languages, in English language, there's like, you know, don't take it personally, kind of, you know, don't take it personally. How else am I supposed to take it? Well, don't take it personally. Ouch, you know, it's like, you know, because that's the mechanism, that's the mechanics behind of how the emotions work. But when emotions are seen for what they are, and one has experience with that, then it becomes one's second nature. One simply observes one's strongly experienced, let's say we speak about that most commonly understood to be as posing the most discomfort and problem, let's say anger. When the anger is there, one can simply experience it fully for what it is, without neither projecting it, nor identifying with it, nor, most importantly, linking it to anything in terms of one's previous experiences. So it fails to leave an imprint. And emotions meant to be experienced. The full gamut of emotions meant to be experienced. From the point of view of Tantra, that is the whole point. More about it later. Why that is the whole point.